Welcome to Landlords TV, a production of Landlords New York, and this program is LNT Time with Michelle. This is the show where you get to spend some time with me, Michelle Morato-Itkowitz, and we get to talk about an area of law in New York City that I have been practicing in for over 20 years, and that's landlord and tenant litigation. This is a production of Landlords New York, and I am honored today as our first guest to have Janelle Simmons.
Thank you.
She's the Executive Director of Landlords New York. Janelle, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here on this first episode of LNT Time.
Okay, so this is the question I have to ask you, and it's a question that people ask me when they find out I'm affiliated with Landlords New York. It is an online social network, a social network.
Correct.
But for landlords and property managers, and that's pretty exclusive.
Absolutely.
So why a social network for a professional type of thing? Like, what's going on here?
Well, I like to think of Landlords New York as a social platform and network that's connecting today's generation of landlords and property managers. And we really started this idea, the founding idea and the principle behind the company was this notion of coming from a place of frustration, really. Don't you just wish you knew what fellow landlords and property managers know? So for every landlord or landlady that's scratching his or her head over a problem, a question, a solution, there's someone else who has experienced that same problem and has the answer. So we've created a place where you are in a trusted community of your peers, you know that you're speaking with like-minded individuals, and there's that freedom to be able to socially, in a comfortable environment, ask those questions.
Absolutely. I go to a lot of events, and a lot of times landlords and managers are there to sort of see the keynote speaker, but you'll see the keynote speaker is talking and everybody else is out in the back by the vendor tables, like talking shop, swapping stories. So Landlords New York, I guess, takes that to a different level. It's 24/7. It's all kinds of things.
That's absolutely right. We're the online extension of a lot of the industry events and trade shows that you attend. There's the ability to find vendors. You're networking, you're interacting with each other, you're learning from your peers. You're able to reach out if a question needs escalation to an expert such as yourself, a legal question that, yes, you can go to another member and say, have you dealt with this? And they can offer their advice, but sometimes it needs to be taken to a professional that can really help you. So that's really, we are an online extension of those networking events.
So what kind of, I mean, I'm looking at the site every day. There's so much happening there. People are concerned about many, many issues. There's a lot of issues these days for landlords and for property managers. But what do you guys see as trending as some of the biggest things that people are most interested, people on the ground, people actually owning and managing property?
Absolutely, and people are finding us in a number of different ways, and we're getting a lot of different questions. Some of the activity that I see in the forum is everything ranging from a problem that you're having in your building or dealing with a tenant situation. I think one of the most common themes that I see and that I find people searching for and finding us through Google and different search engines is this question of, I've gotten to a place where I'm dealing with an eviction. What is the fastest, what's the best, what's the easiest way to approach that? Is it holdover versus non-payment? What's the difference in a holdover and a non-payment case?
Actually, I can help you with that. So if you don't mind, if you have a cup of tea and a cookie, and I can just turn to the membership and we can talk about what is the difference between a non-payment and a holdover.
Sounds good.
Okay, so I'll see you after. Okay, so the question on the table today is, what is the difference between a non-payment proceeding and a holdover proceeding when we're talking about landlord and tenant cases? But first, I think we need to step back for a second and talk about what is a landlord and tenant case. When we're talking about a landlord suing a tenant in New York City, we're almost always talking about a summary proceeding for the recovery of real property. Summary proceedings, pursuant to the Real Property Actions and Proceedings Law. Summary proceedings are different than regular lawsuits. They're different because in general, they go much faster. Now I know if you're a landlord, you might say, hey, my landlord and tenant case didn't go so fast, but comparatively, compared to regular litigation, summary proceedings go a lot faster. And one of the main reasons is because they don't include what's known as discovery, depositions, exchange of paper, and then the issues in a summary proceeding are very narrow. And that's where we get to the idea that we have two types of summary proceedings. You have your non-payment and you have your holdover. Non-payment and holdover, those are the only two types of summary proceedings, and you can't do them together at the same time. The essence of a non-payment is that the landlord is suing the tenant for rent. And there is a predicate notice required for every non-payment, and that is a rent demand. So rent demand, non-payment, that's how that works. In a holdover, the landlord is suing the tenant for possession. It's not so much about rent. The landlord wants that tenant out of the space. Now, the easiest example to show this is, let's say the lease ended on June 30th. Now it's July 2nd. The tenant hasn't gotten out. The landlord hasn't accepted any more rent from the tenant. So now the landlord can do a holdover suing for possession, assuming we're not in the rent stabilized context, obviously. So another way that a holdover might come up is if the tenant is doing something so bad that the lease is going to terminate early, in which case you'd have a notice to cure that default. If it doesn't get cured, you have a notice to terminate, and the notice to cure and the notice to terminate become the predicates for your holdover. So that's basically the difference between a non-payment and a holdover. Other things you should know are that non-payments are generally quicker. There are generally less legal fees associated with a non-payment case. When you do a non-payment case, if the tenant defaults, the typical way to get the default is to apply for a judgment of possession and a warrant of eviction via the marshal. You don't have to run into court. Holdovers generally take longer. They generally run more in legal fees. And also, holdovers, as soon as you bring a holdover, and this is a little different, it gets a first court date. So from the day you make your holdover lawsuit, you know that a court date is coming up within 2 weeks. So those are the major differences between non-payments and holdovers. And let's go back to our guest. Janelle, did you get a chance to watch my teaching portion?
Yes, of course. Thank you.
Was it helpful? Did I answer the question?
Yes, and just a question for me. Do you see more non-payment or holdover cases?
Actually, there are many, many more non-payments than there are holdovers, exponentially more. I think the statistic is something like there are 10 non-payments for every one holdover. But interestingly enough, most of your trials really have to do with holdovers. Holdovers get tried a lot more, and holdovers end up costing landlords more. There are more legal fees. They're more technical because really you're looking at the end of a tenancy. So it's a bigger deal.
Right.
So more non-payments, but the holdovers get tried more.
Okay, thank you.
I think that about wraps it up. So thank you for joining us, and we'd really love your feedback on Landlords TV and specifically on LNT Time with Michelle. So please give us your comments, give us your suggestions. Thank you.